"Get out of this kitchen, you don't belong here anymore." That's what the woman said while standing in my house, holding my knife like she owned everything I had built. The shocking part? They had no idea this house was still legally mine. And every step they took inside it was being recorded. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 67 years old. Just a quiet widow who spent most of her life raising a son, sacrificing everything so he could have a better future. I wasn't wealthy, not by appearance, but what they didn't know, what they were completely unaware of, was that this home, this kitchen, and everything inside it was protected in ways they could never imagine. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I read every comment. Now, let me tell you how everything actually began. It didn't start with strangers in my kitchen. It started decades earlier, in a house that was never meant to be taken from me. My husband, Thomas, and I bought that home when we were still young enough to believe hard work would always be enough to protect what we built. It wasn't much at first, just a small, aging property in a quiet neighborhood outside Seattle, but it was ours. Every wall, every repair, every improvement came from years of sacrifice. Thomas handled the physical work, fixing things himself late into the night, while I managed everything else, finances, bills, and the kind of long-term decisions that don't feel important until they suddenly are. When Thomas passed away, the house changed. Not physically, but emotionally. The silence became heavier. The kitchen, once full of conversation, became a place where memories echoed louder than voices. I could have sold it. Many people told me I should. But I didn't. Because that house wasn't just property. It was proof that we had built something real. Something that lasted. And more importantly, it was the one thing I could still control after losing him. I stayed strong for our son, Daniel. I made sure his life moved forward even when mine felt like it had stopped. I helped him through college, supported him when his first business failed, and gave him money I couldn't really afford to give. At the time, it felt like love. Looking back, I understand it may have also been something else, something that slowly taught him he would never have to earn what he could simply receive. The changes in him were not immediate. They never are. They came quietly. Less gratitude. More expectation. Fewer visits, unless he needed something. And then, when he married Rebecca, everything shifted again, but in a way I couldn't fully explain at first. She was polite, careful with her words, always respectful on the surface. But there was something behind it, something observant, measuring. The first time she asked about the house, it didn't feel like curiosity. It felt like calculation. At the time, I ignored it. I told myself I was imagining things. I didn't realize then. I was already being watched. The changes didn't come all at once. They never do. If they had, I might have reacted sooner. Instead, they arrived in small, dreaded, almost forgettable moments, things that felt too minor to question, too subtle to confront. Rebecca started with suggestions, rearranging items in my kitchen without asking, replacing utensils I had used for years, adjusting where things were placed, as if she was slowly rewriting the space to fit her own habits. At first, I let it go. It seemed harmless, practical, even. But over time, those small changes began to feel like something else entirely. Like I was being moved out of my own home without being told. Daniel changed too. though in quieter ways. He started speaking differently, not just to me, but about things that used to belong to me. He would say our house at first, then the house, and eventually, without realizing it, my place when talking to others on the phone. The first time I heard it, I paused, not because of the words, but because of how natural they sounded coming from him, as if something in his mind had already shifted ownership, even if nothing had changed legally. Then came the conversations about the future. He brought up simplifying things, talking about how it would be easier if everything was consolidated under one name. His name? He framed it carefully, like he was helping me, protecting me, making things easier as I got older. I remember smiling, nodding, pretending to consider it. But inside, something tightened. Something told me this wasn't about convenience. Around that same time, I started noticing how often they discussed things in low voices, how quickly conversations stopped when I entered a room. One evening, I overheard just enough to understand the direction things were moving. My name, the house, timing, then silence. That silence said more than anything else could have. That was the moment I stopped assuming. I didn't confront them. I didn't ask questions. Instead, I did something they didn't expect. I started paying attention. Quietly, carefully. Because by then, I understood one thing very clearly. Something was coming. And whatever it was, they didn't think I would be ready. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Sudden and sharp. The kind of pain that doesn't give you time to think before it takes control. I remember gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. The same counter Thomas had installed himself years ago. As the room started to tilt around me, chest tight, breath shallow, and then nothing but fragments, sirens, bright hospital lights, voices speaking over me like I wasn't fully there anymore. They kept me for observation. One day turned into 3 how-to-0, then 5. Long enough for routines to break, long enough for absence to become opportunity. Daniel visited once. Briefly, standing at the foot of my bed with that same distant expression I had started to recognize. He asked how I was, checked his phone twice while I answered, then said he would handle things at home. Rebecca didn't come at all. At the time, I told myself they were busy. That life doesn't stop just because someone else gets sick. But something about the way he said, "I'll take care of everything," stayed with me. It didn't sound like concern. It sounded like control. When they finally discharged me, the doctor told me to rest, to avoid stress, to take things slowly. I nodded, smiled, thanked them. Then I called a taxi and went home. The moment I stepped onto the porch, something felt wrong. Not obvious, not loud, just different. The air didn't feel empty anymore. It felt used, touched, as if the house had been living without me. When I opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the smell food I didn't recognize. Something unfamiliar, lingering in a space that had always been mine. Then came the sound. Voices. Laughter. Movement coming from the kitchen. For a moment, I thought I was mistaken. That Daniel had invited people over, that there was a simple explanation I hadn't considered yet. But the second I stepped into the doorway, that thought disappeared. 3 strangers stood in my kitchen. One at the stove, one leaning against the counter, one pouring something into a glass like they had done it 100 times before. None of them looked surprised to see me. That was the part that settled everything. I asked who they were. The woman turned angster, looked directly at me, and said, "You shouldn't be here." And in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It sharpened. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I simply stepped back, took out my phone, and made a call. Not to Daniel, not to Rebecca, but to my lawyer. Within minutes, everything was set in motion. What they didn't know, what they were completely unaware of, was that weeks before my hospital stay, I had installed a small security system throughout the house. Not because I suspected anything specific, but because something didn't feel right. And now, every second of their presence in my home was documented. Every face, every action, every word. While they continued cooking, laughing, and treating my home like a rental property, I stood there quietly, letting them dig their own grave. When Daniel finally arrived, clearly called by someone inside, I saw it in his eyes. Shock, fear, and then guilt. Rebecca followed behind him, trying to control the situation. She said it was a misunderstanding, that they thought I wouldn't be coming back soon, that they had permission. But here's the thing, permission from who? Because legally, there was only one person who could give it. Me. And I never did. The final confrontation happened right there in the kitchen, the same place where it all began. My lawyer arrived with documents, not held 24. The police followed shortly after. And just like that, the illusion shattered. The strangers were escorted out. Daniel stood there, unable to meet my eyes. Rebecca tried to argue, but the evidence spoke louder than anything she could say. Unauthorized entry, illegal occupancy, recorded proof. There was no way out for them. In the end, they lost everything they thought they were gaining. And I stayed. Not because I needed the house, but because I needed to remind them and myself of something important. Money reveals who people really are. And truth always finds a way to reveal itself. I didn't scream. I didn't seek revenge. I simply reclaimed what was already mine. Now I live alone again, peacefully, on my own terms. And sometimes, when I stand in that kitchen, I remember everything, and I feel stronger, not broken. So tell me, if you were in my position, would you have done the same? If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the strongest voice is the one that refuses to stay silent.